Good morning. The Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee will please come to order. Today we are holding a hearing on the nomination of California Secretary of Labor Julie Su to serve as Deputy Secretary of Labor. Senator Burr and I will each have an opening statement, and then I will recognize Senator Padilla to introduce Secretary Su. After Secretary Su gives her testimony, senators will have 5 minutes each for a round of questions. I'm happy to stay for a second round if any senator has any remaining questions. Before we begin, I do want to walk through the COVID-19 safety protocols in place. We will follow the advice of the attending physician and the Sergeant-at-Arms in conducting this hearing. We're all grateful to everyone, including our clerks, who have worked so hard to get this set up and help everyone stay safe and healthy. Committee members are seated at least 6 feet apart, and some senators are participating by video conference. And while we were unable to have the hearing fully open to the public or media for in-person attendance, live video is available on our committee website at help.senate.gov. And if you are in need of accommodations, including closed captioning, you can reach out to the committee or the Office of Congressional Accessibility Services. We received Secretary Su's formal nomination on February 13th. Her Office of Government Ethics paperwork, including her public financial disclosures and ethics agreement, on February 18th, and her committee paperwork on March 2nd. Secretary Su, thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to welcome your daughter, Lee May, who's here with you today. And I know your family, including your parents and your daughter, An Ling, are watching as well. They must be very proud. Our country is not yet through the COVID-19 crisis, but with the passage of the American Rescue Plan and President Biden announcing he will direct all states, tribes, and territories to make all people 18 and over eligible to be vaccinated no later than May 1st, we're finally on the right track. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, but we have to make sure we do not run out of steam before we reach it. And we're going to need a full team working together to make that happen, which is why it is so important we work to get qualified nominees like Julie Su quickly confirmed. President Biden has taken important historic steps, as has Congress, but there's more work to be done to not only fully rescue America from this pandemic, but to recover from this crisis and rebuild a stronger and fairer economy. I'm incredibly glad we were able to extend the unemployment benefits millions of families need to help them get by in the American Rescue Plan, but we also need to increase wages. 1 in 9 workers is making poverty-level wages, and some workers are still being paid discriminatory sub-minimum wage. I'm glad we were able to take steps that will cut child poverty in half, but we need to do more to help families get quality, affordable child care and provide national paid sick days and family and medical leave, especially since in the midst of a pandemic, 1 in 4 workers do not have paid sick leave. I'm thrilled we were able to protect millions of workers and retirees from having the pensions they earn dramatically cut, but we need to help more people plan for retirement. 1 in 4 people have no retirement savings, and women are 80% more likely to face poverty in retirement. And in addition to the American Rescue Plan, there's more progress we are making that we must build on. President Biden has taken important steps towards protecting workers, but we know that work is not done yet. And even when it is, we will need to do more to help ensure people are safe from workplace hazards, pandemics, harassment, and discrimination, something my Be Heard in the Workplace Act works to address. President Biden has also moved to withdraw the previous administration's joint employer and independent contractor rules, which shielded the largest corporations from being held accountable for violations of workers' rights and significantly restricted workers' right to minimum wage and overtime. In addition to these much-needed steps, the Senate needs to join the House in passing the PRO Act, which I introduced last month, to strengthen the right to join a union and collectively bargain. And while we all know our economy can't work without women, it's also painfully clear it is not working for them. 1 in 4 women have considered downshifting their careers because of this pandemic. More than 2 million women left the workforce over the last year, and women of color face an even larger pay gap, higher rates of unemployment, and a steeper climb to recovery. We need to do so much more to ensure equity in our economy and address the sexism, racism, ableism, and bigotry that has hurt too many for so long. But if we're going to build an economy that works for all working families, we need someone serving as Deputy Secretary of Labor who will fight for them. And that someone is Julie Su. Julie Su's experience leading one of the largest state labor departments in the nation, her decades-long commitment to fighting for workers' rights, and her personal story as the multilingual daughter of Chinese immigrants have given her the experience, background, and values to be a successful Deputy Secretary of Labor. As a labor lawyer, Julie Su fought to defend Thai garment workers who were trafficked into the United States and forced to work behind barbed wire and under armed guard. And she then pushed to change the law to ensure corporations are held responsible for working conditions in their supply chains. As California Labor Commissioner, Julie Su cracked down on wage theft and launched a multilingual campaign to help workers understand their rights and feel safe speaking up about employers stealing their wages. And as California's Secretary of Labor, Julie Su has implemented increases to the state minimum wage, created good-paying, high-quality jobs, expanded access to benefits for gig workers and workers who are paid low wages, and protected essential workers who are bearing the brunt of this pandemic, including by establishing and enforcing mandatory emergency COVID workplace safety standards. In short, Secretary Su's record as a champion for workers is long and clear, and the need to confirm her is obvious and urgent. We need a fully staffed Department of Labor to protect workers and help us end this pandemic, to foster healthy communities, and to build a stronger, fairer economy. We need a Deputy Secretary of Labor like Julie Su who is committed to ensuring workers have a fair and just workplace, a livable wage, a secure retirement, safe working conditions, access to accommodations, the right to join together and collectively bargain, and are treated with dignity and respect. I urge my colleagues to work with me on a bipartisan basis to confirm her without delay. Finally, I seek unanimous consent to put in the record 44 letters in support of Secretary Su's nomination from more than 650 labor unions, former colleagues, labor leaders, and more. So ordered. And with that, I will recognize Ranking Member Burr for his opening remarks.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairwoman Murray. Thank you for scheduling this hearing to consider the nomination of Secretary Julie Su for Deputy Secretary of Labor. Welcome, Secretary Su. I congratulate you on your nomination, and I know your family is proud of what you've accomplished. Article 2, Section 2 of the United States Constitution gives the Senate the power of advise and consent to approve or reject nominations of the executive offices made by the President. The Senate's not a rubber stamp, but an equal partner in shaping the staff of the executive branch. It's an important responsibility, and I do take it personally. I do not take it lightly. I've supported nominees of presidents of both parties, even when I didn't agree with the president or the nominee, if I thought the nominee was qualified for the job deserving my support. In fact, a month ago, I supported the nomination of Marty Walsh to be Secretary of Labor. I said then that Mayor Walsh has the background, the skills, and the awareness of the need for balance in conversations between labor and management. Mayor Walsh emphasized during his nomination hearing that he wanted to work with us collaboratively to help the American workers improve and expand opportunities. Mayor Walsh committed to making sure commerce and labor work cooperatively. So I'm pleased to be able to support his nomination and provide my consent. California is not a model to emulate for the rest of the country. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, California's unemployment stands at 9%, the second highest in the country, and has one of the worst increases in unemployment over the last year of COVID. The state's imposed some of the most onerous restrictions on businesses and individuals and has been one of the slowest to recover from the pandemic. The controversial AB 5 bill would have decimated many of the companies that have helped to give the state its reputation of innovation. For example, Uber and Lyft were both born in California and have revolutionized how people around the world get from place to place. Both companies would have had to cease operations in the very state in which they're headquartered if AB 5 bill would have been implemented as passed. The law was so radical that the same California voters who overwhelmingly supported President Biden overturned the core of AB 5 by a whopping 17%. California is also known for high taxes, and that applies both to individuals as well as businesses. And those rates aren't likely to go down anytime soon, considering the staggering amount of state liabilities on the state's balance sheet. The Tax Foundation ranked California 49th out of 50 states in terms of business climate. The classic idea of if you want less of something, make it more expensive applies to employing people in California. The Mercatus Center has also found that California has the most state regulatory restrictions in the country, nearly 30% more than the state with the second most restrictions. The tax and regulatory burden weigh heavily on employers, and it's another reason why we're seeing so many businesses flee California in favor of other states with more reasonable policies. Maybe that explains why so many companies are moving from California, bringing their jobs to North Carolina, Texas, and elsewhere. I see a lot of moving trucks with Texas plates in Charlotte and Raleigh, North Carolina. As long as they don't bring their politics, we're happy to welcome with open arms. Turning to our nominee, Madam Secretary, you have a few challenges in gaining the support for your nomination. First, some of your friends have made it clear that they think you'll be a shadow secretary, when the role deputy secretary is really that of chief operating officer. Your friends may have thought they were helping you, but some of what they've said raises some real questions. So, Secretary Sue, we discussed yesterday in my office, so I hope you can convince the committee that you understand the job you've been nominated for. I also hope you can demonstrate that you aren't aiming to drag Mayor Walsh away from what I think is a sensible agenda he committed to pursuing when he sat right where you sit today in his confirmation hearing. Second, more importantly, I'm even more concerned about the failures and fraud in California's unemployment insurance. California suffered some of the largest fraud in our nation's history during the pandemic. Over $11 billion and perhaps as high as $30 billion in fraud occurred in California's unemployment system. Even death row inmates received unemployment checks. I'm sure there's a reasonable debate to be had about the death penalty, but I can't imagine one that involves paying people on death row for being unemployed. What's worse about the fraud committed on California and the U.S. taxpayer is that it was entirely preventable. It's my understanding that an auditor made a series of recommendations just as you took office, specifically recommending that California exclude sensitive information, including Social Security numbers, from its identification system, but nothing changed. In fact, when the fraud was ramping up and billions being stolen from taxpayers, California actually made things worse. You ordered the agency to eliminate some important safeguards to speed up payments, which led to even more fraud. Additionally, the people waited months for their benefit, and a state audit showed that call centers only answered 1% of their calls. These are operational failures of extreme proportion. What's worse is that California's received hundreds of millions a year, every year, over the past decade, in federal funds for administration of their unemployment system, but no changes or improvements to those systems were made. It's not Washington's fault the California system still uses COBOL. You'd think with all those tech companies still in Silicon Valley that one or two of them would have been able to provide new technology and new systems. As we discussed yesterday, it's true that all states struggled, but California's struggles swamp everyone else. And none of their secretaries of labor are here today seeking a promotion. So while you may not personally be responsible for every case of fraud that happened, the fraud did happen under your watch. So please help this committee understand why that is an experience the Senate should reward with a promotion. I'll keep an open mind as we go through this hearing, and I appreciate your willingness to discuss these issues with me and with the committee today. I thank the chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member Burr. And now I will turn it over to Senator Padilla. Welcome to our committee to introduce Secretary Sue.
Thank you, Chair Murray and Ranking Member Burr, for once again inviting me to address the Help Committee to introduce a fellow Californian. I'm honored to introduce Julie Sue to be Deputy Secretary of the Department of Labor. And I'm confident that her experience as Secretary for the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency will enable her to immediately hit the ground running at the federal level. As I believe we all agree, our nation's workers and businesses are struggling to survive the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's critical that we have experienced leadership in place. There is simply no better preparation for the challenges that we're facing than serving at the state level in the state of California, a state that represents the 5th largest economy in the world, the largest economy of any state in the nation, and that reflects the local variations in business conditions that we see across the country. As you will hear from her, Julie is the proud daughter of immigrants. Her parents came from China in search of a better life for their family, just like my parents did. Her parents worked minimum wage jobs for decades. Julie understands how hard families in America are working right now just to make ends meet. Her upbringing ingrained in her how to run a small business. She watched her parents run a dry cleaning and laundromat business and later a pizza restaurant. She learned firsthand what goes into making businesses succeed, and she knows how to help them and how to help workers. As a seasoned lawyer, fluent in Mandarin and Spanish as well, Julie spent 2 decades representing workers, including immigrant workers and workers of color. She became deeply familiar with their struggles, the struggles of garment workers, hotel housekeepers, caregivers, nurses, restaurant and retail workers, workers in all the industries that have been severely impacted by the pandemic and are critical to our nation's economic recovery. As California Labor Commissioner from 2011 to 2018, Julie launched the first Wage Theft is a Crime campaign to help low-wage workers and employers understand their rights. And most recently, as Secretary of the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency, Julie has overseen 7 major departments, boards, and panels that improve access to training, promote quality jobs, eliminate barriers to employment, create innovative career pathways, and level the playing field for employers large and small. Julie knows that collaboration with employers and the business community is key to success, and that's why you see so many small business groups and chambers of commerce supportive of her nomination. Now, I know that California has struggled with fraud in its unemployment system in recent months, perpetuated by the same organized criminals that have targeted several states around the country. That's why Julie's experience is even more helpful and needed by the federal government, as the federal government will work with states to crack down on unemployment fraud nationwide. I know that Julie will take every opportunity to do right by both our nation's workers and employers, to think boldly and to expand opportunities to achieve the American dream, just as her parents did. Julie Sue is a proven leader who is uniquely qualified to take on the challenges of the department at this moment. I believe it's critical that this committee give her the fair and respectful consideration that she has earned, and I urge the committee to support her nomination. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Padilla. Senator Hirono was planning to be here with us today to help introduce Secretary Sue. Unfortunately, she needed to fly home to Hawaii for a personal emergency, but she has written a statement of support. I ask unanimous consent to enter it in the record. So ordered. Secretary Sue, you may now begin your testimony.
Chairwoman Murray, Ranking Member Burr, and members of the committee. I am honored to appear before you today and am grateful for the time that you took to meet with me prior to this hearing. I've enjoyed our discussions about the Department of Labor and its critical role in meeting the challenges of our time. I have appreciated the chance to share with you my vision for the Deputy Secretary of Labor's role. I want to start by thanking President Biden for this incredible opportunity, and I also want to thank my parents who are watching from California, along with my daughter, Ann Ling, a high school senior who will attend Amherst College in the fall and play on the basketball team. My older daughter, Lee May, is with me today. She is a student at Yale, and I'm so grateful that she could be here in person. My children and I are proud products of the American dream. I am the daughter of Chinese immigrants. My mom immigrated to the United States on a 30-day voyage on a cargo ship because she could not afford a passenger ticket. Both of my parents came to America for opportunity, and they found it in Provo, Utah, where they studied, in Madison, Wisconsin, where my sister Shirley and I were born, and ultimately in the home they built in search of warmer weather in Southern California. My parents worked minimum wage jobs while going to school and instilled in me a deep appreciation for the struggles and pride in work. My mom eventually got a job working at Los Angeles County, starting as an office clerk, and retired after 27 years. That job gave our family financial security and health insurance. It also gave my mom stable, predictable hours, and now that she's retired, a pension. I know well what a good union job does for a family because I am a direct beneficiary. While I was growing up, as Senator Padilla mentioned, my family also owned a dry cleaning and laundromat business and later a pizza restaurant. I remember for years my dad would go to his day job and then go directly to our business, returning home after 10 p.m., often with a pizza that a customer had rejected for my sister and me to pack in our school lunches the next day. I have a firsthand appreciation for small businesses who are the engines of our economy. I also grew up translating for my parents, a common experience in immigrant families. After college, I went to law school and became the first lawyer in my family. My experience as a translator at home shaped my commitment to making the law understandable and meaningful to individuals and communities too often left out of our economy. I spent nearly 2 decades representing workers, including immigrant workers and workers of color, garment workers, hotel housekeepers, caregivers, nurses, restaurant and retail workers, many of the same workers who have been hardest hit by the COVID pandemic. What I learned from these courageous individuals is that too many people still work full-time, year-round, and live in poverty. Too many are denied a just day's pay for a hard day's work. And as we've seen during the pandemic, too many workers have to choose between their safety and their livelihoods. At the same time, I learned that working people, when given a chance to organize, to be heard, not only made things better for themselves, but bring the hope of such opportunity to those around them. If confirmed, I will bring these lessons and experiences to my role as we collectively continue to navigate these trying times. For the past 10 years, I have served the people of California to build a fair and inclusive economy that values workers and supports businesses, all of whom want a fair shot at opportunity and security. I have prioritized innovative partnerships with employers, ensured robust enforcement of labor laws, and worked to combat wage theft. During my time leading and managing Labor Department programs in California, the world's 5th largest economy, I have seen firsthand 3 things that I want to share today. 1, with a clear vision, bold ideas, and commitment to making government work, rejecting the idea that we have to do it this way because it's always been done this way, for example, we can transform what we do and how we do it. 2, government has a meaningful role to play in providing support to employers who play by the rules. One of these roles is investment in workforce programs to provide training to meet the need for skilled workers and give more workers access to quality jobs. So much of what government can do is good for both employers and employees. I have been a leader dedicating to finding and expanding those areas of common ground. And 3, the lowest paid workers who often work crushing hours under brutal conditions deserve their government's support and respect. It is possible that we can not only ensure that their earned wages make it into their pockets, we can also build their faith in the very idea of government itself. These lessons drive my desire to serve in the federal government. I am grateful for this chance to work to preserve and expand the American dream for all Americans. And if confirmed as the Deputy Secretary of Labor, I look forward to my partnership with you in the years to come. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Secretary Sue. We will now begin a round of 5-minute questions. I ask my colleagues to please keep track of your clock and stay within those 5 minutes. I am happy to stay if anyone has additional questions for a second round. Secretary Sue, as we continue to grapple with the health and economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm optimistic about the rising rates of vaccinations and the drop in cases and deaths in recent weeks, but we have a long road of economic recovery ahead. Our nation's essential workers have spent the last year responding on the front lines, but many lack paid sick days, fair wages, and proper health and safety protections. Millions of workers remain unemployed. In late 2020, some estimates showed nearly a quarter of small businesses remained closed, with the most severe losses among businesses owned by women, people of color, and immigrants. Secretary Sue, you have led California's labor agency's response to the pandemic, overseeing implementation of state and federal rules, defending the rights of workers, and ensuring health and safety on the job. Tell us what you have learned from your experience in leading the response of the nation's largest state to the COVID pandemic, and how will your state leadership experience inform how you approach the federal COVID response from the Department of Labor?
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Murray. Thank you for the question, and thank you for your ongoing leadership, especially when it comes to women in the workplace. Every worker I have ever represented, assisted, or worked with taught me something different. But the one thing they all taught me is that what we were able to do when we work together is far more than what we can do when we work alone. And that spirit of collaboration, of listening, the idea that we can accomplish big things if we create big tables and create a seat for everyone to be heard, is the way that I would approach the job of Deputy Secretary of Labor. In my career, and especially over this last year during the pandemic, I have experienced working across many interests. I know that in government, we need to work across all agencies to meet the challenges our country faces. It is how we have approached COVID in the pandemic, and I welcome this approach. I know that all levels of government, federal, state, and local, have to work together. At the end of the day, people don't care how we draw our lines. They just want to know if we've made their lives better. And I understand how to support career staff in government agencies to enable them to meet the mission of their departments. I believe that organizations, including government, have to invest in making things work. Last week, the President spoke directly to the American people about the pain that this pandemic has wrought. He talked about that longest walk that any parent has to make to their children's bedroom to tell them, I've lost my job. And this past year, too many Americans have had to do that. And the unemployment insurance system is supposed to be a safety net for those times. In California, over the course of the pandemic, UI claims jumped dramatically. From the last week in February to just 2 weeks later, they jumped 1,400%. The number of claims by mid-April was more than the total number of claims filed in all of 2019. This meant that, like just about every other state, California's unemployment insurance system was overwhelmed. And each claim represented somebody who suddenly had the ground fall out from under them. I personally heard from thousands of these individuals, people who one day had a job and the next day didn't know how they were going to pay rent, were going to food banks, living in their cars, and worried about whether they would be able to buy life-saving medication. And so the magnitude of the suffering cannot be overstated. California had 1 in 5 claims in the entire nation. And we were working on a system built on outdated technology. I identified this as a priority when I came in 2019, but frankly, system upgrades are not quick endeavors. And so when the pandemic hit, the arcane technology made the system both fragile and inflexible. Again, this didn't just happen in California, but it proves something that I have brought to my decades of work improving systems and organizations, that we have to invest in making things work in good times so that they can meet our needs in bad. And this is especially true in unemployment insurance because it is a system that is most needed in the worst of times, as we've seen in this last year. We took steps in California to process the historic numbers of claims. We did ramp up. We got to the point where we were paying over $1 billion a week in benefits to individuals who needed it. Money that was a lifeline to individuals and also put money back into the economy because recipients of these benefits paid them directly for the basic necessities, groceries, rent, and the like. According to the Century Foundation, which evaluates UI performance across the country, in November, California was second. Colorado was first, but California was second in the percentage of initial claims paid. This means that despite the large numbers and despite the failing technology, the steps we took helped to deliver. But I mentioned the people that I heard from because this should never happen, that the safety nets in place do not work and are not strong enough. So we have to update our systems. We have to get payments out while we stop fraud. And we need a Department of Labor that works with the states, that understands the real world challenges, and can set a big table to approach these issues with a national approach because they are a national problem. And if confirmed, I would be really proud to work with all of you on these problems.
Thank you very much for that response. Senator Burr?
Thanks, Senator Murray. Again, welcome, Secretary Sue. Chris Liu and Patrick Pasella, two prior Deputy Labor Secretaries, have said that the role of Deputy Labor Secretary is one of Chief Operating Officer. However, in an interview with Fox VOX, Congresswoman Judy Chu expressed that before you agreed to take on the deputy role, you had a talk with Marty Walsh to get assurances that you would have the ability to concentrate on your areas of expertise. These are yes or no answers. Do you see the role as Deputy Secretary of Labor as the Chief Operating Officer, yes or no?
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Burr. Thank you so much for the time you took to meet with me. I appreciated the chance to talk about this then, too, and I absolutely see the role of Deputy Secretary of Labor as the Chief Operating Officer of the department.
Will your priority be managing the Department of Labor's 15,000 plus employees and 10 regions, yes or no?
My priority will be to best serve, hopefully soon to be Labor Secretary Walsh and the administration on making sure that the Department of Labor delivers on its mission. And absolutely, a key part of that priority is what you just mentioned in terms of supervising, managing, making sure the department works well and that the staff have what they need in order to perform their jobs at the highest level.
The buck stops with you as Labor Secretary in California. California has provided it at least $10.4 billion and up to $31 billion in fraudulent unemployment insurance payments under your leadership. Again, these are yes or no answers. Shortly after you were appointed secretary, a state auditor urged the Employment Development Department to address its mailing system after millions of Social Security numbers were included in a mailing sent to wrong addresses. Did you implement the recommendations made by the auditor, yes or no?
So, Ranking Member Burr, thank you again. There are a lot of issues in the unemployment insurance, what has happened over the last year. That audit happened well before the pandemic, and yes, the recommendations of that audit have been implemented.
In August of 2020, the California State Auditor's Office identified as a high-risk issue the Employment Development Department's management of federal funding in response to COVID-19. And in September 2020, California's state auditor, Elaine Howell, was directed by the California Joint Legislative Audit Committee to conduct emergency audit of EDD. Is that in fact true, yes or no?
Yes, there were a couple of audits conducted in relation to the pandemic. One was about fraud, and the other was on operations.
According to State Auditor Howe, you directed the Employment Development Department to pay certain claimants UI benefits without making key eligibility determinations and to temporarily stop collecting biweekly eligibility certifications. Knowing the unemployment insurance system was at risk of fraud, you chose to remove the checks and balances. Yes or no?
So thank you, Ranking Member Burr. I think what's important here is, I mentioned there were two different audits. The pandemic-related fraud that has been perpetrated across the country is really a nationwide insidious criminal scheme. That is a different audit and a different situation. I'm happy to talk about that as well. But then the audit about operations, which mentioned, yes, that I took steps consistent with what was then the Department of Labor's guidance in order to try to make sure that benefits continue to get out to Californians when we saw that there were threats to the stability and the security of our system. We did not waive any fraud checks at the time. There was no finding that that decision led to the massive frauds that—
You didn't waive any certifications?
We did not waive certifications. What we did was we said, because we saw that individuals were coming into the system to certify every 2 weeks, and this was threatening the stability of the system itself, what we said was that there was a period of time in which people, especially because of the pandemic, it was very unlikely that people were going back to work, that if they went back to work and were no longer eligible, they had to come and inform us of that separately, but not through the system that was supporting the entire
Let me get my last
UI.
question in, if I can, Secretary. As Deputy Secretary of Labor, your job will be to prevent fraud and abuse of taxpayer spending. Will you prioritize expedience over protecting against fraud and taxpayer waste? Yes or no?
So the UI system is a constant, it's a dual effort, both to get payments out to people who need them, especially in the most desperate of times, and to stop the fraud. I will certainly prioritize the continued fight against fraud. You know, the president called our nation's battle against COVID the need to be on war footing. I would say that the battle against the criminal enterprises that have relentlessly attacked our pandemic-related benefit system is one front in that fight. And in California, we've been on those front lines, right? When we saw the initial spike in claims that on the pandemic unemployment assistance, we stopped the automatic backdating of claims. After we did that, the Department of Labor instructed all states to do it. It shut down a number of the fraudulent claims that came through. We've also adopted technology. I know we talked about this yesterday. We were one of the first 5 states to do so. This is an effort to stop the identity theft fraud, which was a big part of the fraud that again, you know, cost, that hit every state. And the Department of Labor estimates is about 10% of all of the pandemic unemployment assistance claims. We put that in place. Now over 20 states have also done that. So I would take the experience that we've had in California to stop fraud, to shut the front door to fraud, and to send a strong message that our systems are secure, to make sure that we can, that the Federal Department of Labor supports the states in this effort rather than leaving states to fend for themselves, as they're attacked one by one.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Casey.
Secretary Sue, thank you for putting yourself forward for this position. We're grateful to have this opportunity to ask some questions. And I wanted to first make just a brief comment on your nomination from a personal perspective. Your family story and your story is a great American story of success and hard work, and we're grateful that you're able to now have an opportunity to serve at the federal level, and we appreciate the work that you've done in the state of California. I wanted to start with a question about Americans with disabilities. And I know that we've talked about this. I spoke to Mayor Walsh about this as well, about expanding employment opportunities for people with disabilities. We've made a lot of advances, as we know, in the last couple of decades in areas like assistive technology to help folks with disabilities. Job coaching is another where that has advanced. There are other supports that enable people with disabilities to succeed in the workplace, and quality employment opportunities for people with disabilities at the same time continue to be far too limited. So even though we've made some advancements, we still have a long way to go to provide those quality employment opportunities. We know that thousands of individuals with disabilities also continue to be paid a sub-minimum wage under Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which I think is wrong. So my first question, Secretary Sue, is will you commit to working with me and other members of the House and the Senate to create more and better employment opportunities for people with disabilities and to expand competitive, integrated employment opportunities?
Thank you so much, Senator Casey. And yes, absolutely, I would commit to working with you on that issue. I know that this administration shares your concern about the subminimum wage. We believe that that is a matter of equity and fairness. And certainly, as we recover from this pandemic, we have to make sure that we are creating as many employment opportunities, particularly for those who face additional barriers to employment, as we can to ensure the strongest recovery we can.
Thanks very much. I want to ask a question about the agency itself. As you know from your work in state government, and I had experience in state government as well, sometimes coming into a department and facing challenges that confront that agency becomes fairly common. I know that there are some concerns about what's transpired the last couple of years, including issues like staffing vacancies in critical parts of the department. So you have some experience coming in to an agency in state government that had some challenges. Can you talk about your experiences then and in the context of taking over an agency at the state level and gaining the buy-in of new employees and the cooperation to achieve a mission, and how that would prepare you to assume the role as Deputy Secretary?
Thank you so much, Senator Casey. And I really enjoyed our conversation about this particular point and the shared experiences we've had in managing government agencies. So I take great pride in the investments that I have made in my time in leadership in the staff of the agencies that I've been a part of. And I think this goes back to Ranking Member Burr's initial question too. I think one of the things I'm most excited about, if confirmed, is the opportunity to work directly with the career staff at the Department of Labor, who I understand have felt somewhat marginalized over the last few years, and who I think would be anxious and excited to work along with Mayor Walsh and hopefully me, if I'm confirmed, to really restore a sense of mission at the Department of Labor. I think it's really important to invest in staff. I always tell the staff I work with that I've spent my career fighting for working people. That includes my own staff. And so really looking at the needs of our employees, the need for training, the need for clear direction, the opportunity to create creative teams in order to tackle different problems, the idea of setting clear vision and then allowing people to innovate and to make decisions in fulfillment of the department's vision. Those are all areas of work that I both have experience in and will be very, very excited to bring to the department.
Thank you, Secretary Sue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Casey. Turn to Senator Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Secretary Sue, welcome. First, let me say that I believe that every member of this panel would agree with you that unemployment insurance is absolutely critical to individuals who have lost jobs through no fault of their own. However, there can be no excuse for the kind of rampant fraud that has been so prevalent in California. Now, I recognize that there has been UI fraud across the country, including in the state of Maine, but the sheer scale and scope of the fraud in California not only dwarfs that of every other state, it's estimated to be at least $11.4 billion in fraud, but also seems to be directly related to directives that you issued. And these fraudulent payments are incredible. $21,000 payment to our colleague, Senator Dianne Feinstein, $800 million worth of payments that went to prison inmates, 1,700 claims from a single address, yet they were paid. So you gave a confusing answer, in my judgment, to Senator Burr about the directives that you issued. So I pulled up a press release that your department issued, and it says very clearly that you sent a memorandum to the Employment Development Department director directing that department to temporarily suspend unemployment eligibility certifications. So in other words, they're paying UI benefits before determining if the applicants are eligible. You also directed the agency to temporarily stop collecting eligibility certifications from claimants. Now, the U.S. Department of Labor did not waive those requirements, and a California state audit found that your directives jeopardize the integrity of the system. So, do you disagree with the state auditor and with the federal requirements? Why did you take those actions? Why did you jeopardize the integrity of the system?
Thank you, Senator. And I appreciate in the hearing for Mayor Walsh, you really laid out what was sort of the perfect storm in unemployment insurance benefits, right? The massive spike in claims on the heels of really record low levels of unemployment. You know, when the pandemic hit, unemployment insurance funding was at a 50-year low nationwide, along with technological challenges or failure to invest in technology. And layer on top of all of that, the fraud really created, again, like a perfect storm of challenges. First, to your point about California. It's true, California has received a lot of attention because we are a very large state. As I said, California has processed 1 in 5 unemployment insurance claims in the entire country, more than Texas and New York combined. And we've also been very transparent about our challenges. I should note that fraud in the unemployment insurance system itself, the system that has to do with the eligibility requirements that you're talking about, in California has been, even in the pandemic, in the last year, about 5%, which is comparable to what it is in years prior. It's comparable to what it was in 2019. The massive amounts of frauds that you are legitimately concerned about, I am too, occurred in the pandemic unemployment assistance program, which did not have those same requirements. And on those, the 10% that the $11 billion or so, which is 10% of the total payments, that 10% is about the same as what the Department of Labor estimates is the fraud nationwide on the system. Again, I'm not trying to defend it or to justify it. I am putting it in context. We also did bring in an external strike team in California to look at why there were so many, why there were delays in payments, to dig deep and figure out what we needed to fix. And then we made that strike team report public too. So I think transparency is very, very important in government. It has raised more attention on what we're doing in California, but it also then allows us to talk about the early and aggressive steps that we took, as I mentioned, to stop the fraud. The Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program was more vulnerable to fraud. I say it's one of the fronts in the war because we've all learned from, again, it was a balance there of wanting to get money out quickly because we needed to. And then once we saw the fraud, we took immediate steps. Those steps led to the same steps being taken by the Department of Labor, instructing other states to do that. And Congress also took steps, including back in December with the Continued Assistance Act, putting in more criteria before payments could be made. And so, this is a front of the war that's going to require all hands on deck. And my sense is that on the fraud piece, because every state has seen it and it has slowed payment in every state, it's further threatened technological systems that were already vulnerable, that we need a national approach to the national problem. And based on my firsthand experience in the trenches in California, I would bring that experience. I think we need people who understand and have a clear-eyed view of what the myriad problems are and how they interconnect and what we can do about them to both make sure that we're making payments where needed and we are stopping fraud where we need to.
Well, my time has expired. I will follow up with you on these issues because I still don't think I got an answer to my question about your suspending the requirements.
Thank you, Senator Collins. We'll turn to Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair Murray. And thank you, Secretary Sue, for joining us today. I look forward to your swift confirmation, and I look forward to working with you to address the many challenges that our nation's workers and families and businesses are facing. Millions of essential healthcare workers, food service workers, and others have been on the front lines of this pandemic since it began. And I believe that it's time for the Congress and the administration to step up and put their health and safety first. Included in the January 21st executive order on protecting worker health and safety, President Biden asked Congress to pass legislation that strengthens and expands OSHA's ability to protect workers, just as provisions in my COVID-19 Every Worker Protection Act would do. Do you believe that protecting worker health is central to combating the spread of this pandemic? And do you believe that the issuance of an OSHA emergency temporary standard is still necessary to help protect workers from COVID and to help businesses safely reopen?
Thank you so much for that question, Senator Baldwin. I so enjoyed our conversation, including our memories of childhood in when my parents lived in Eagle Heights, and what you said about the incredible diversity that you experienced as an elementary school student and how much that affected your whole worldview and your outlook. I really appreciated that. The answer to your question is I do agree that we need to do everything we can to protect the health and safety of workers. What we have seen in this pandemic is really just how what happens when workers are forced to go to work without proper protections. I think a global pandemic really drives home the point that worker health is public health, and we need to be sure that we are doing what we can, both as a matter of worker protection, but also as a matter of public health protection. If we cannot stop the spread in workplaces, we cannot get a handle on the pandemic, and that is a key prerequisite to getting our economy back on track. At the heart of my decades of work has been protecting workers. I will say that in terms of, I think that there's also a very important role when we talk about workplace standards to do outreach to support employers who are working to put standards in place. I heard from hundreds of employers in California, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, about the need for help in trying to figure out what exactly needed to be done to create safe workplaces. And to that end, in California, we actually created an employer portal. What this does is allows employers to enter in their address, their zip code, their industry, and it pulls from all the various guidance that is is out there. It pulls from county public health guidance, workplace-specific guidance. It pulls from industry guidance and California state public health guidance in order to generate a roadmap for employers on what a site-specific workplace health and safety plan looks like. So it's an example of, I think we need to give employers the tools and clear guidance in order to protect their workers. In terms of your question about the emergency temporary standard, I know that this is something that the department is still working on, and I expect that the results of their work and consideration over the last couple of months will be imminent.
Thank you. I want to continue on the topic of worker safety. The COVID-19 pandemic has worsened many issues that healthcare and social service workers were already experiencing before the pandemic began. According to the GAO, these workers experience incidents of violence at 12 times the rate for the overall workforce. My Workplace Violence Prevention for Healthcare and Social Service Workers Act would direct OSHA to create a standard to better protect these workers. Will you commit to placing this important safety issue back on the department's agenda and work with this committee to help tackle the issue of violence in the workplace?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I see that my time is up, so I will say that I definitely agree that preventing violence in the workplace is very, very important, and I would look forward to working with you on that issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Senator Cassidy. Senator Cassidy's not in line. We'll turn to Senator Kane.
Thank you, Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, and Ms. Sue, good to visit with you. I enjoyed our visit the other day. I think the questions that are asked about the fraud issues are important, but I do want to share a Virginia perspective because we were really beset with some similar challenges. At the time that the pandemic hit us, we were at a record low unemployment, and that also led in Virginia, and I'm assuming California and elsewhere, staffing levels in our agencies had also dropped pretty significantly as the unemployment rate had come down for a number of years. Congress, wanting to do the right thing, thank goodness in a bipartisan way, did three things to put real significant burdens on our state unemployment agencies. First, we expanded the unemployment benefit, the additional $600 a week, and that's now being revised as we go. But that was an initial challenge. Take the state normal reimbursement rate and add that $600 to it. Second, we extended the number of weeks that someone could claim unemployment insurance. Again, that was a smart thing to do. But the third thing that was probably the kind of really challenging thing was the PUA program, which dramatically expanded the universe of people who could get unemployment. I think I've often heard my colleague Senator Warner say that sadly in the current American workforce, only about 30% of American workers fit within the traditional UI model because it was designed so long ago. So now we have gig workers and part-timers and self-employeds and solo, proprietors. We have this huge universe of people who aren't in the system at all. And again, acting quickly as we needed to, we said, hey, look, this is a group of people that has some significant need right now, so we want to create an unemployment insurance program for them as well. Now, as I understood your answer to Senator Collins' question, it sounds like the fraud challenges that you've dealt with in California, still dealing with, and we are in Virginia too, are disproportionately in that third program, Congress's mandate that states offer unemployment benefits to this massive universe of people who'd never been in the system before. Did I understand that answer correctly?
Yes, thank you so much, Senator. I enjoyed our conversation very much, too. That is exactly correct. Over 95% of the fraud that we have experienced in California is in that pandemic unemployment assistance program, which, as you said, by design, was intended for people who were not eligible for regular unemployment insurance. It did not have the same checks against your employer or look at your prior earnings at the outset of the program.
Right, so our design of it, and again, we were trying to act quickly because the
Right.
economy needed it, so I'm not saying we did anything wrong, but
Right.
that expansion at a time when staffing levels were already at sort of historic lows, it created fraud challenges. In Virginia, it created unacceptable backlogs. I mean, people were flooding my offices with calls about how come I'm supposed to qualify. I see what Congress has done, but I can't get an answer. So I think these are significant challenges, and I do think, there has to be an answer about how we dealt with it. Did we deal with it correctly or not? But there also has to be an answer for us because, I think one of the challenges coming out of the pandemic is, do we have a UI system that's fit for the 21st century versus a UI system that is designed for the 1950s? I mean, if we're going to have now a workforce that is largely maybe gig workers and sole proprietors and part-timers and things like that who aren't included in traditional UI, a question that we have to grapple with on the Help Committee and Congress generally is, well, do we need to broaden the UI system? But if so, how do we do it? How do we pay for it? How do we avoid fraud? How do we avoid unacceptable waiting times for people to get, benefits if we decide that they're entitled to them? So I think it's a really important issue, not just because of past performance for all of us, but I think there's probably forward-looking reforms that we might have to make, and the experience of people flooding in and saying, well, I'm a sole proprietor, so you should give me a benefit. It turns out they're not. We'll probably have to have different fraud detection mechanisms if we expand the universe in that way than we would with traditional employees. Let me ask you this. If we're going to do an infrastructure economic recovery bill, I hope we will, I really worry that we don't have the workforce currently to do infrastructure. We don't have a sizable enough workforce to do infrastructure. The last question I'll ask is, at DOL, how would you contemplate working together with the Secretary to think about the workforce challenges attendant upon, hopefully, a significant infrastructure investment?
So thank you so much, Senator. I think this is one of the biggest opportunities we have to align the skills of the American workforce, especially coming out of this period of unemployment and economic difficulty, with the need to rebuild and the opportunity to rebuild infrastructure. And every goal that we have, every opportunity we have to, ensure a clean climate, to build enough housing, to ensure that we have roads and a transportation system and bridges that work and schools. All of these are opportunities to create good jobs in the communities that need them the most. And I think that aligning our workforce system so that we are training for those jobs and also ensuring equity and access to those jobs, that those who face the greatest barriers to employment, who might otherwise be left out, we have an opportunity to be very thoughtful about all of those goals. And I really see them as opportunities. And I would look very forward to working with you and with the people at the Department of Labor to make those things happen if I'm confirmed.
I've run over my time. Thank you, Chair Murray.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sue, welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation that we did. I appreciated the discussion about much of which you've raised here today with regards to unemployment insurance and how we deal with the matters of fraud. I think what Senator Kane has raised is just in terms of kind of recognizing that going forward, we need to be looking really structurally at that system that was built perhaps on a model that folks really didn't anticipate we would see these changes in this very mobile, very nimble workforce of today. You and I didn't have an opportunity to speak to it in our conversation, but I understand that when you had a chance to visit with some of the staff here on the Help Committee, the issue of H-2A, H-2B visas came up. I know that is something significant from my perspective with Alaska's seasonal workforce. And while that is something that is not exclusively within Department of Labor, it shares with Homeland as well. That is a matter that we struggle every season, just about this time of year, to ensure that we have the necessary numbers of seafood workers able to come to the state, again, for a very reduced season, and working within Department of Labor with the folks over at Homeland to assure that those visas are able to be issued is something that continues to be a priority. I wish that I didn't have to come back every year and make this case and make this argument. We would like to get a permanent fix, and we would hope that we would be able to work with those within the department to achieve just that. So just to follow on a little bit to what Senator Kane mentioned with regards to what we're seeing with the gig worker. The regulations that we have in place currently, which define employee versus independent contractor, are ones that we see come into play for discussion and great debate from time to time. What steps, just kind of general conversation here, what steps would you take if you're confirmed to address these regulations as they relate to definitions of employee versus independent contractor?
Well, thank you very much, Senator, and thank you also for the conversation that we had prior to this hearing. So I think that that question is it's very important. It's important in our economy. I think that every worker who goes to work, when they have the protections of employee status, they know that they will be protected by minimum wage and overtime laws. They know that they will be protected by workplace health and safety laws. They know that if they are injured, they have workers' compensation, and if they are unemployed, they get the unemployment insurance benefits. And so this question is really important to the basic protections in the workplace. I will also say that in my years of working in government, I've met with thousands of employers who speak about the need for a level playing field, who say that it is extremely difficult to comply with labor laws if their competition is allowed to evade those same labor laws, creating a race to the bottom. And so I think that these issues are at the heart of the question that you ask. If confirmed, I would work closely with the solicitor and the staff of the Department of Labor to be thoughtful, to seek input about guidance. And I think that the principles of worker protection and a level playing field are just so important, especially as we look to what it means to build back better, what it means to build an economy that works for everybody. I will also say, Senator, just on your question about H-2Bs, I think that's a really important issue too. And if confirmed, I would work, again, with the department to ensure that we have both timeliness and consistency of consideration of the visas that you're talking about, knowing how important they are, especially to your state and to others.
Thank you for that. My time's just about expired, but to the point about workforce and workforce development, we have good, strong training programs within our unions within the state. They do a great job. We've got a Job Corps that we think should be more of a model around the country in terms of how we ensure that it is workers trained for the jobs that are available. But would hope that you would have an opportunity to look again to some of the successes that we have with our specific job training. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Murkowski will turn to Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Murray and Ranking Member Burr. And thank you, Secretary Sue, for being here today, and thank you for your willingness to serve. I want to start with two questions about retirement, and then I have a couple other questions if we get through those. As you know, the United States Department of Labor is tasked with helping more workers save for retirement and helping retirees protect and utilize their savings. We know that Americans of all ages are struggling to save for retirement, and many American workers and retirees are at risk of outliving their retirement savings. One recent survey found that 1 in 5 Americans in their 70s have less than $50,000 saved. As Deputy Secretary of Labor, what policies would you focus on to help American workers save more for retirement?
Thank you very much, Senator. I think this is such an important issue. Americans work so hard so that they can have a safe and secure retirement. I know from again, my mom's experience, that the pension that she has that now allows she and my father to live in retirement is absolutely critical to their health and their well-being. A couple of things on that. I would say, the issue you're raising is why the multi-employer pension relief that was part of the American Rescue Plan was so important. Again, just making sure that employees who have been paying into the retirement and relying on their pensions get them is very, very critical. And then I think that retirement savers also need to get the kind of advice that they need to make sure that they're investing their retirement in the best way possible for themselves. And if confirmed, I look forward to being briefed on the rulemaking process at the Department of Labor on this issue, and to understanding what we can do to better protect retirees, which is a basic part of the fundamental mission of the department.
Thank you. In addition to helping more Americans save for retirement, I believe we also have to work to protect retirement accounts from potential cybersecurity threats. Yesterday, following a request from myself, Chair Murray, and House Education and Labor Chair Bobby Scott, the Government Accountability Office released a report highlighting the threat that cyber attacks pose to retirement plans. The report confirmed that cyber threats put private defined contribution retirement plans, like 401ks held by more than 100 million of Americans, at risk, and recommends that the Department of Labor take action to address this issue. I believe that Congress and the Department obviously must do everything that we can to prevent against these cybersecurity risks. So as Deputy Secretary of Labor, what policies would you focus on to help ensure the security of retirement plans?
So I think that issue of ensuring against cyber attacks, we've certainly seen again in the last year and even in this conversation just how important that is. And I would again seek a full briefing from the department on the steps that are already in place, do an assessment along with the secretary on what else we need to do, how we need to make sure that they're stronger, and definitely consider this a very high priority, especially as we know that the president has actually called for providing almost all workers with access to a 401k of some sort. So I think that it absolutely will be a priority for me and for the department.
And I also think it's going to take convening not only government experts and agencies, but the private sector too.
Absolutely.
Because this has to be a joint effort, and it's critically important to the economic security of so many Americans, right?
Without a doubt, and I think that is the point of creating more public-private partnerships, especially in things like this where there is tremendous expertise in the private sector. Bringing that to bear on the challenges that we face in government is, I think, also very, very important. And I look forward to learning about partnerships that already exist and building on those, and also finding where there are gaps and making sure that we fill them.
All right, thank you, and let's turn to one other issue quickly. As Secretary of the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency, you have firsthand experience executing traditional unemployment insurance programs and expanded benefits at the state level. While states have primary responsibility for distributing unemployment insurance, the Department of Labor plays a significant role as well. Based on your own experience, how can the Department of Labor better support states administering these programs, and should Congress consider reforms to improve the administration of unemployment insurance going forward?
Yes, so thank you, Senator. I see that I don't have a lot of time, but I'll try to say, I do think this connects to Senator Kaine and Senator Murkowski, the points about we have an opportunity now to look at the unemployment insurance system, how it works and how it doesn't. At the first level, I would say that the Department of Labor, in providing consistent and clear guidance, is absolutely critical to the states. And I, again, have seen firsthand how the importance of that consistency. And I think that there are also, because it is a federal state program, many opportunities for better collaboration, both on the administration of benefits and on the fight against fraud in a collaborative way between the federal government and all the states.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Cassidy.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Sue, I enjoyed our conversation on the phone. Just to follow up a little bit on what Senator Hassan said and some others. She asked, let's go off her last question, regarding how can DOL better support a state agency, to return to an earlier line of questioning by others. Obviously, one of the concerns, and just to hear your straightforward response to this, is that the DOL Office of Inspector General had warned your state agency in May of 2020 that at least $1.2 billion in benefits paid out in March and April were potentially fraudulent. And it seems as if these red flags are being raised and were not addressed by your department in California until August of 2020, at which point the $600 stimulus checks had run out. It kind of begs the question, why did your agency not respond more quickly? And if DOL has to do more, what more should DOL do to have an agency be more responsive?
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you for our conversation also. So I think on those questions, again, the perfect storm of challenges that we faced in California, that all states faced, there was the Federal Department of Labor's warning about fraud. That itself has also really been, evolving over time. The estimate of what the fraud was at the beginning has gone up because we have seen that the massive attacks, they weren't the typical kind of fraud that usually hits the unemployment insurance system.
Let me ask, because as I understand, the specific thing pinpointed was the lack of identification, insufficient requirement for identification. Now, that seems as if that would be roughly scalable, that yes, we have a lot more, but we still got to check your identity, because whether it's few or many, we have to know it's truly somebody who is worthy, who exists, is actually applying. And DOL flagged that. So I guess just to go back to my question, what could DOL have done differently, and why was there such a hesitancy in your department to respond to the warnings they did give?
So, Senator, that question really goes to Senator Kane's point. The concern that the DOL OIG raised was because by design, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program was meant to pay out to individuals who were not eligible for regular UI and who did not have either employer records, which the traditional UI system checks against, or prior earnings, which the traditional UI system guards against. As I mentioned, in California, that kind of fraud was comparable to prior years of fraud. The massive fraud was in a system that was by design did not have those in place. And I believe what the DOL was doing was raising the concern about that. The other vulnerability in the system was what is known as automatic backdating. Basically, when somebody applied for PUA, they could get benefits back to the beginning of the pandemic. And it was that vulnerability that became exploited. Now, the rule that DOL had at the time was automatic backdating. Again, once we saw the spike in those claims, which was in August, in the first week of September, we shut down automatic backdating. That then triggered the Department of Labor, followed by instructing all states to do so. So again, I think that this is a front on the battle that we have to bring, build a table with experts to really be smart about how we address them, collaborate between the states so that states are not fighting the battle on their own. But at the end of the day, truly understanding what happened and why it happened is going to be very important for fixing the problem.
Next, let me ask, as regards the multi-employer pension funds, which Senator Hassan just raised, because I think you'll be part of that process. The $86 billion in debt was wiped away, but no structural changes were made. We could begin reaccumulating that debt. What ideas do you have that could prevent us from just getting another $86 billion until we blow out spending sometime in the future and don't pay for it in a way to clear the deck?
So, Senator, without a lot of time left to address that fully, I will commit to working on that issue if confirmed. I think that relates to my general approach, which is that I do think we have to solve problems before they become bigger problems, and being clear-eyed and being thoughtful and bringing experts to the table to really understand the problem, how we got there, and how we prevent it in the future, I would assure you would be a priority of mine in my approach to the job if I'm confirmed.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Welcome. Thank you for your prior service and your willingness to serve at the federal level. I wanted to stay on the topic of your service in California, but on a different subject, and that is a law that California has had on the books for a while, effectively banning the use of something called non-compete agreements. Non-compete agreements cover today about 20% of U.S. employees. They impact low-skilled and low-wage workers, just as they impact higher-skill and higher-wage workers, and they are inherently non-competitive. They effectively give employers a veto right over an employee's right to choose where they work. This is becoming a real area of bipartisan agreement. We have legislation modeled after California's in Congress now that's supported by a bipartisan coalition of senators. And so this is probably an issue that will be more likely regulated by the FTC than labor. The Department of Labor still has the ability to glean information about the impact of non-competes. President Biden ran on a promise to address this issue. So I wanted to ask you about what your experience is in California with a fairly rigorous restriction on non-compete agreements, and whether you'd be willing to work with the committee and with the Senate to at least make sure that the DOL provides relevant information to help us make a decision moving forward on this issue.
Yes, thank you so much, Senator. So absolutely yes to working together on this issue if I'm confirmed. I think this is one of those examples of how something that's good for workers is actually also good for employers. The ability for employers to, attract and train the talent that they need. I think it's just a very important part of, the many areas of common ground that when we do something that protects workers, there's also a benefit to employers. So absolutely, yes to working on the issue together.
And my sense is that in California, you found that the existing protections for intellectual property and trade secrets is sufficient in order to make sure that employees who are leaving, one firm that's highly dependent on IP doesn't take it and bring it illegally to another company. It's important for folks to remember that just because the non-compete agreement may not be available to an employer, they aren't bereft of other mechanisms to stop the illegal transfer of intellectual property. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Senator,
Great.
Yes.
The second topic that I wanted to touch on is related to this issue of unemployment, but specific to the issue of long-term unemployment. We have a workforce training agency in Connecticut called The Workplace that has been featured in national publications and national media because they have specifically attacked this issue of long-term unemployment with a program called Platform to Employment. And it recognizes the fact that for folks that have been out of the workforce for a very long time, for years in some cases, there are all sorts of ancillary effects to that individual and to that family that have to be dealt with in order to get them back into the workforce. And I think we're going to be looking at a very large population of long-term unemployed once we finally turn the corner. Is this something that you looked at specifically in a targeted way in California? Do you think it's worthwhile for the Department of Labor to think about this specific population of individuals who've been out of the workforce for a long time, who frankly right now don't even show up on our statistics, and look at programs like Platform to Employment, others that have had success in rooting people back into the workforce?
That's right. Thank you, Senator. Yes, I think that it is definitely a population that needs and deserves our attention. Again, especially coming out of the pandemic, where we have seen long periods of unemployment for individuals and, frankly, people dropping out of the labor force as a result, disproportionately women workers. And so I think that there is a tremendous need to target our workforce programs on those who face the greatest challenges, and the long-term unemployed are certainly one of those. I will also just note, I know there are innovative and effective programs in your state and other states that we ought to be building on. In California, too, we've invested in what we call high road training partnerships. They're really demand-driven partnerships between employers and employees where industry comes together, business, management, labor, for community colleges and other educational institutions and community-based organizations to support people who are trying to get into the workforce, and creating opportunities for high-road jobs where people can actually support a family and lift themselves out of poverty. And so I think finding those innovations and figuring out how we duplicate them where appropriate is something I would love to do. And I know that there are models in your state that we could use.
It's great to hear. Platform to Employment has an 80% success rate, and some economists suggest 1 out of 3 jobs that have disappeared during the pandemic aren't coming back. So this is going to be a problem that we all have to deal with. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Burr. It's great to be with everyone. And Secretary Sue, I'm so happy to see you here, and I'm grateful for your willingness to serve, and just want to thank you so much and congratulate you on your nomination. I'm struck listening to this conversation and the questions from my colleagues about how important the Department of Labor is right now, and how the Department of Labor was envisioned as an agency that is an advocate for working people, and how crucial that is, especially as we emerge from COVID. A pandemic that has laid bare so many of the inequities in our system, and a pandemic that has had particularly hard impact on women and people of color. So I, for one, am really grateful for your leadership, your management experience, and the capacity that you can bring to this role. I want to just take a minute of my time also to note that how exciting it is that we have finally made progress in the American Rescue Plan on passing essentially the Butch-Lewis Act, which will ensure that retirees and people who have counted on their pension through a multi-employer pension plan know that those pensions are going to be secure. This is something that I've worked on carefully and hard with Senator Brown and Senator Baldwin and many others. So it is fantastic that we've been able to get this done. And it is going to make such a difference to the 22,000 Minnesotans who count on the Central States pension for their safe and secure retirement, and for thousands and thousands more folks around the country. So I just wanted to take a moment to mention that. Secretary Sue, you I want to ask you a question about wage theft. According to the Economic Policy Institute, Americans lose 3 times more in wage theft than they do in street robberies, bank robberies, gas station robberies, and convenience store robberies combined. And this is, of course, disproportionately impacting low-wage workers, women, and workers of color, who are more often than not the victims of wage theft. I understand that you have done a lot of work on this in California, so I wonder if you could share with us how you think about wage theft, and what do you think the Department of Labor should be doing to better stop it?
Well, thank you so much, Senator. And actually, that statistic is one that I used when I was leading what's the equivalent of the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division in California, both as a grounding and as a motivation for the importance of our work. So thank you for that. I think that wage theft is one of those phenomena that fundamentally disrupts the basic promise of our society, that somebody who goes to work should be paid what they were promised. And so I think the Department of Labor has a very important role to play. Again, in California, I launched a Wage Theft is a Crime campaign when I oversaw that department. And what we did was we eliminated the random scattershot inspections. I don't think that it's beneficial for employers or employees, or frankly for government, when our investigations are random. I think it's really important to focus on those who willfully break the law, and make sure that that we send a clear message that that's not going to be tolerated. I also think it's very important to put the right tools in the hands of our staff. When I had that position in California, I invested invested in technology, in making sure that we had tablets in the field, making sure that employees have what they need to do their jobs effectively. And then we engaged in outreach with employers and with employees to make sure that people knew what the rules were that they were supposed to play by, and that we were hearing about the effects of our enforcement. So I think it's a really important priority for, or very important responsibility of the department, and I understand that it is one where it could use some attention. And if confirmed, I would look forward to bringing a strategic and thoughtful approach to the fight against wage theft.
You want to go to Burr? Well, thank you, and I look forward to working with you on that. You are talking about the value of technology. I totally agree with you on that. And also the importance of enforcement. If there isn't good enforcement, then people will continue to try to push employers, the bad employers will continue to try to push the rules. And too often working people just don't have the power to protect themselves in these circumstances. And I also agree with you on the power of communications to make sure that employers and employees understand what's happening and how they can fight it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Burr, did you have an additional question? Or do?
Yeah, actually go to Senator Rosen.
Okay.
Sorry.
Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. And thank you, Ms. Sue, for being here, for stepping forward to serve, for your inspiring family story. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I know how much you'll do to support working families who really are the backbone, not just of Nevada, but of this entire nation. They make our tourism, their hospitality, our entertainment economy possible for my home state, and I look forward to working with you. But we have a lot of work to do, and I like to focus a little bit on cyber and STEM workforce, because one of the things I really enjoy talking with you about is apprenticeship programs, particularly in the IT and cyber fields. We tend to think of apprenticeships as just relating to building trades because they've worked so well there. But I believe that we really could expand the model to strengthen the pipelines in the critical IT and cybersecurity industries. This is going to give more young people the chance at these good paying jobs, or folks who want to be retrained for jobs. I've introduced bipartisan legislation to help create and expand registered apprenticeship programs in cybersecurity, and I look forward to working with you on that when you're confirmed. So can you talk about some of the work you did in California in this field, and how you'll work to scale these programs at a federal level? We all care about apprenticeships. How do we expand these opportunities in our states?
Yes, thank you very much for that, Senator. I would say that this topic of workforce development and job training programs and how we invest in those who need jobs came up in nearly every one of my conversations with the senators on this committee. And so I look forward, if confirmed, to working with everybody on these really important issues. In terms of apprenticeships, you were absolutely right. I loved our conversation about it, and I think, I've certainly found in California that it is one of the strongest ways we have both to meet the needs of employers and to create pathways for individuals who might not otherwise have the opportunity into good jobs. And as you said, apprenticeships in the building trades have really set the gold standard, and created an opening for us to look at how we utilize the model of learn and earn, how we help people who otherwise wouldn't be able to stop working or to get training, to train for good paying middle-class jobs. And I think a big part of making apprenticeships work is the partnership, is creating alignment between employers, the employees, educational institutions, community-based organizations, and to create systems that really support the needs of employers and the needs of employees for jobs. I know I've talked to apprentices who got out of a domestic violence situation because they were given a chance to be an apprentice, who lived in homeless shelters, but through an apprenticeship found a job working at a high-end hotel as a cook. I mentioned high road training partnerships earlier. We have a hospitality training academy, a partnership with with Unite Here Local 11, which has trained individuals for hospitality jobs. And so to your point, Senator, about cybersecurity, I think that's one of those in-demand jobs. They're good paying jobs, and they're jobs that have already been identified as, if we're not deliberate about diversity and access for communities, then it will not happen on its own. So apprenticeships is a way for us to make sure that we create equal access to these jobs. And I've certainly talked to apprentices for whom, you know, their time in school and high school, it didn't make sense to them why they were learning about right angles or measurements. But when you put them into an apprenticeship where they're really learning how these things apply in the real world, it makes a really big difference. And so I'm very supportive of
I want to build on that really quickly with the minute I have left, because women have been hit the hardest in this pandemic. You were talking about it, apprenticeships, retraining people or training people, but I want to touch on returnships. This is where we create pathways for mid-career workers who return to the workforce. We know this pandemic's really impacted women, their ability to return, maybe after having to step away for childcare or other caregiving. I have a STEM Restart Act that's going to create a national program that would bridge the gap between workers who are more likely to be long-term unemployed and underrepresented in STEM. And so I would love to talk to you about this idea, not just of apprenticeships, but returnships for that mid-career worker who really needs to retool for a variety of reasons, or jobs now that may not even come back after the pandemic.
Absolutely, Senator. Thank you so much. I think there's a spectrum, right, from pre-apprenticeships to what you're talking about for incumbent workers and upward mobility, all very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really look forward to working with you, and my time has expired.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. We'll turn to Senator Marshall.
I thank the chair and welcome as well. I think my first question, as potentially to be the Deputy Secretary, Department of Labor, your state of California, like our state of Kansas, really struggled with fraud in the unemployment insurance. Really struggled, continue to struggle. What lessons did we learn, and what was the cause of it? And in your new leadership, what would you do to help stop the fraud?
Thank you so much, Senator. So, yes, I think what I've described is really a perfect storm during this pandemic of very high demand for benefits on the heels of very low levels of unemployment, which in the UI world translates into very low levels of staffing. And then on top of that, infrastructure and capacity issues. And I think all of those provide important lessons. And then on top of that, we have to layer what you mentioned. I know you experienced it in your state. We did in ours, of course, and it really hit state after state, the fraud, the criminal enterprise type of fraud, right? I think it's so important to understand just the scope and the scale and the relentlessness of the kind of fraud that we faced, which is a different animal, really, than what the unemployment insurance system was built to prevent. I will answer this question with what I think are four basic lessons. The first is, I talked about earlier, is I do think that the Department of Labor's consistent and clear guidance about what the states need to do to implement benefits programs, especially new benefits programs at the federal level that have not been in place before, is really critical. That kind of guidance has to come out timely, and it has to be clear, and it has to be, and it has to stay consistent. The second is those investments in infrastructure. And by this, I mean technology, but not just technology. In fact, in many of the states where technology upgrades have been made, they were still hit by the kinds of fraud schemes that we're talking about. So it's the ability to create a flexible, reliable system that works, but that is also nimble enough to respond to what we've seen over the last year. The third is that I think that we need a coordinated response to the fraud that recognizes that it was a national problem. It has been called the biggest fraud scheme in United States history. It is a national threat, and it needs to be responded to with a national response. Now, it should be done as a federal-state partnership, but the states have struggled against significant odds to process the unprecedented volume of claims and to implement new federal programs, and I think would welcome that kind of partnership with the federal government. And the last piece I would just say is we still have to pay attention to equity in all of this, right? We saw that the pandemic disproportionately hit African American, Latino workers, Pacific Islander workers, women workers, and our unemployment insurance benefits system has to be aware of and responsive to those kinds of needs. And it applies also to rural workers.
I need to move on to the next question, if you don't mind. So thank you for that answer. Our state of Kansas, our governor also struggled mightily getting out the unemployment insurance benefits. It's the #1 complaint we get from Kansans, typically still getting 15 complaints a day. Story after story, people crying and call and say, look, we don't have money to pay for our electricity, enough money to go get groceries, waiting on those unemployment checks still. So here's fraud happening. The people that need it aren't getting it. Would you add anything else to what you would do to improve that situation as well, other than the 4 points you already made?
I just, I agree. I think that was the challenge. And I think that understanding the multiple reasons why that happened, but your point is that, there is a sort of a tension, right, between paying benefits out quickly to those who need them and stopping the fraud. And the unemployment insurance system is a constant effort to make sure that we do both of those things well. I would say that, the priorities that I raised, but other ideas that I know, this committee is likely to have based on the multiple experiences in your state, I would very much welcome conversations about how we tackle it.
Okay, next I just want to go really at a high level, like at least a 20,000-foot high level, maybe even higher. Right now, employers are trying to figure out how to make a safe work environment with COVID. And we realize the science is not settled. The science is never settled, that with viruses, the only predictability about them is that they're unpredictable. We've been told to wear no mask, 1 mask, 2 masks. We've been told to have our kids 3 foot apart, 6 foot apart. And the truth is we don't know, that we're shooting from the hip. The science is really a stretch for the most part. But your guidance to employers is going to have a huge impact. Like you set the gold standard, you set the bar. This is what an employer needs to do. Just kind of describe how you look at that situation, maybe not real specifically, but just what rules will guide you, your values, yeah.
So I think that's right, Senator. We have to be based on science. We have to be based on our evolving understanding of the virus that we face, and I agree with you that is why as clear of guidance as we can put out, so that employers know what they need to do to keep their employees safe, but also themselves, right? To keep it's required in order for them to keep their business operating. It's very important for us to be based in science, and then to make sure that we are doing as much outreach as we can so that employers understand their obligations. And then, as I talked about earlier, creating tools for employers who are struggling to comply to do so.
My point I'm trying to make is there's not good science. And you try to apply the science, but the science we're getting now is not the gospel. Half of it's wrong. I just don't know which half. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Senator Hickenlooper.
Nomination to be, sorry about that. I'm going to get this unmuting eventually. First, I want to congratulate you, Ms. Sue, on your nomination to be Deputy Secretary. It's a tremendous honor, obviously, and as you being the child of immigrants, it is a great inspirational message to people all over this country. And I know that you're going to bring the same passion and experience to your new role. I listened with interest to your discussion with Senator Rosen about apprenticeships, and I recognize I come at it from a slightly different point of view, with the recognition that almost half of the American workforce is in small businesses, and yet 70% or over 70% of all American workers actually had their first job with a small business. But we know that growth is hindered when those positions that need to be filled need technical training or some form of certification. I think small businesses in healthcare, in technology, manufacturing, computer technology, these all need some sort of support in getting skilled workers. So especially when they are small businesses. So are there ways that the public sector can assist private industry in these cases for the challenge? And would one of those ways be looking at a new form of apprenticeship and what that might mean for providing skilled employees to small businesses?
Well, thank you very much, Senator. Yes, I think that the apprenticeship model could certainly apply there. Apprenticeships are win-wins, and looking at how we might meet the needs of employers of all sizes in industries like manufacturing, right, and like our earlier conversation about infrastructure. Where are the jobs that we have, and how do we create opportunities for people to be trained in those jobs and to do them? I also think that there are opportunities for government to help create bridges, right? A lot of our work is about aligning systems. So when you do have private industry that says, I have the need for these workers, most of our employers are small, so the investments we would have to make in training site by site are really particularly high. We can look at opportunities to create broader training efforts for multiple employers and small employers that would help to meet their needs, and again, create those opportunities for good jobs for people, again, who might not otherwise know about those jobs or might not otherwise acquire the skills for them.
Great, and we agree on that. Let me switch gears a little bit. Back when I was a mayor, and that's a long time ago, we became aware of critical shortages in various industries for workers. But at the same time, we saw again and again the lack of utilizing our senior workforce. And I think part of that comes back to the skills training that's hard to figure out. How do we get people that are mid-career or towards the end of their career to get refreshed on skills training so that they are able to take on some of these jobs where we clearly have a need. And I think Senator Rosen talked a little bit about this as well, but this is kind of a different aspect of that.
Yes, Senator, that's right. I do think that is, though, another important aspect of the opportunities and training that's needed. I know we talked about this in our conversation, and I appreciated that. In California, we have what is called a master plan on aging, which is meant to look at the needs of older Californians. And there is both the need on the, it raises all kinds of questions around care, but it also raises all kinds of questions for people staying in the workforce longer. And what are the supports that are needed? What are the training as conditions in the workplace evolve? And I think those are all a really important part of our workforce challenges that, if confirmed, I would love to work with you on, and also work with the good staff in the department on.
Great, thank you. I look forward to working with you. I've got 20 seconds. If you can very concisely just talk a little bit about the skills gap in cybersecurity in terms of small businesses, and kind of a commitment to kind of help us tackle that.
Right. So cybersecurity is just it has been growing. It is a growth area. There are tens of thousands of cybersecurity jobs in large and small businesses, public and private, throughout the United States. And we have an opportunity to create a skilled workforce for those good, high-paying jobs. And I'd be very committed to working on that issue.
Great. Thank you so much. I yield.
Thank you. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Liu, enjoyed our conversation. We covered a wide range of topics. I think it went up to a half an hour or so. I know we only got 5 minutes here. You've come from a unique spot of being a labor secretary in one of the largest economies in the world. I'd love to know what you think has worked well in California that you'd like to see happen on a federal basis. And I'd like you to also put it in context where my own company that got to California roughly 10 years ago, we recognize it as a fairly austere state when it comes to regulations of all sorts. And I think that your report card would be graded by how many businesses choose to move into a state versus moving out. And maybe it's mostly anecdotal, but from our own experience, we would say that it's not necessarily a business-friendly environment. That being said, tell me what you think you've done well in California, what you think you've done poorly at, and what you'd want to bring to the federal level.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. And I will say that just going back to our conversation, one of the things you mentioned was that when you were hiring, you found that there were more people with college degrees than needed, meaning that we need to make sure that those without college degrees have the skills needed for the jobs in their area. I agree with the importance of that point, and that's why I think that we need to focus on, and we have in California, this is one of our successes for sure, is looking at alternative degrees, right? Looking at two-year colleges. We have a very robust community college system that we partner with a lot on the workforce side of things. We need to look at other kinds of credentials and certificates that both meet short-term, the need to employ quickly and the many kind of desires and directions of job seekers. So I think that's one area that I think where we would have some common ground, and if confirmed, would be interested in working with you on for the experiences in your state in meeting the needs of employers and of employees. I'll say another thing about kind of growth of business in California. One of the things that I've seen in my work is that we have all kinds of businesses, both that start there and come there. But one reason businesses come to California is because of the opportunity both to do well and to do good. And so we have, because of our training systems in place, especially again for people who oftentimes would struggle to get a job at all, we're working with a business now who is interested in hiring, but also hiring formerly incarcerated individuals. And so we have a training program for those individuals so that when they come out, they can actually get a job and get a second chance and find security and succeed. And so I think having training programs for the need, but for communities who will benefit from them the most is really important, something that I would hope to bring to the job, and something that I think not only California, but California has some models for.
I'm glad you brought that up, because my experience back in Indiana was that we were wrestling with the Department of Education that was actually throughout the system stigmatizing that pathway of just better high school skills, and the need to nurture as little education for those high demand, high wage jobs, given the cost of how that has now eclipsed the cost of healthcare in terms of annual increases. So good that it seems like in California, at least on workforce development, sounds like that something that you're doing well there. Let's get to another item of big versus small. And when it comes to large business versus small business, and I know your roots are from the small business world, mine as well, do you think there's a place, whether it be in California or at the federal level, that you differentiate on how you treat through labor practices, through rules and guidelines, to make it easier to for small businesses, especially how they've been traumatized through the whole journey through COVID? Is there a way to do that and yet make sure that you have the practices that need to be universal there? Is there a way to differentiate? Because I think large business and small business have different characteristics.
Yes, I think that's very important, Senator. I know, when I was growing up, my dad worked side by side with his employees. And so, as we talked about on the training side, I think that there are some investments that small businesses, it's harder for them to make. And so are there ways that we can serve multiple employers by meeting an industry's needs? I think there's also the issue of outreach and education that is primarily really important for all businesses, but especially small businesses who may not have the same level of, a legal department or an HR department. And so we've really, in my time in leadership, focused on outreach to small businesses. I know during the pandemic, we have tried to make sure that supports and assistance to businesses were targeted to small businesses who also might not have the capital, for example, right, to last through the crisis that this pandemic has created. So I do think that we have to look at the real needs on the ground. As you mentioned, through my personal history, I have a real sensitivity to that, and I do think it's very important for us to be thoughtful in our approach. One other thing, Senator, to your point, your earlier point, I think you're absolutely right that on the workforce side of things, there's such an opportunity for collaboration between the Department of Labor and the Department of Education, and if confirmed, I would be very excited to work with my counterpart at the Department of Education so that our education and labor priorities from a workforce perspective are aligned.
Do I have any time left?
No, you're 2 minutes over.
Okay, it seemed that way. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Sue, thank you for your willingness to serve as in this very important role. And I'm a person that comes from the small business sector as an employer. I remember growing up as a kid and earning less than the minimum wage and becoming an employer who understood the importance of paying more than the minimum wage. I look at the labor agenda from the president and yours in California, and it really is very concerning to me what the impact of the president's policies will be on small business owners, but more importantly, small business employees and independent contractors. Having been an independent contractor myself for 7 years of my professional life, I will say without any question, some of the things I really enjoyed about being an independent contractor was the ability to have a flexible work schedule to decide when I come in, when I go out. And one of the things that stands in the way of that is the ABC test in California. It seems like if you are a champion of small business and understand the importance of independent contractors, your position as a champion, not just an enforcer, but a champion, a vocal champion of the ABC test, it is in stark contrast to what so many independent contractors wanted. If you apply that test nationally, as President Biden has said he is committed to doing, you would forcibly reclassify as many as half of all independent contractors, if not more, and jeopardize up to about 8.5% of our nation's GDP. The ABC test would destroy many of these independent jobs and kill the flexibility and the autonomy for many of the rest of those jobs. In addition to hiking consumer prices, despite the fact that more than 9 out of 10 independent contractors say they actually like and prefer their status. So Secretary Sue, you've called California's ABC test law an important step to protect honest, I'm not sure what that means, businesses. Californians disagreed. They voted by a nearly 17-point margin last year to exclude app-based drivers from this new test, and lawmakers scrambled to include roughly 100 carve-outs in the law. Have these developments caused you to rethink your outspoken support for the ABC test? And should we be concerned that you'll look to nationalize this very unpopular standard?
Senator Scott, I would say to your point about what did I mean by honest businesses, I'll talk about some of the businesses that I've actually met with, from barbers to janitorial contractors, for whom the misclassification in their industry creates an untenable situation for these small business owners to continue to compete, because they are being undercut by another contractor who says, well, the janitors show up and they do the work at my direction, and they clean these buildings overnight, but they're required to provide all their own supplies, and I'm going to call them an independent contractor. I would also just note that I don't think that there is an inherent conflict between flexibility and worker protections. I think that there can and often has been both. And we've certainly seen that through the pandemic, right? We've seen employers in large numbers move to more flexible work arrangements that, frankly, they didn't think possible, right? We've done that at the state level, so government, which is often slower to be flexible than the private sector, found that we could do that because we needed to do it. So for me, what I'd be really interested in working with you on, if confirmed, is
Yes,
really
ma'am.
looking at how we think about flexibility and innovation. I'm sorry.
Thank you, ma'am, for your answer. And I would certainly say government is slower on almost everything, by the way, and I would agree with you there. I'd also agree with you that the federal employees did not face layoffs, whereas the private sector did. And one of the things that happens when we impose mandates on the private sector is that they lack the tax base to support their businesses. They actually have to run their businesses at a profit. So giving the employees of those businesses the type of flexibility that allows for them to pick and choose when they work, how they work, is one of the reasons why 9 out of 10 of the independent contractors say, hey, wait a second. I want to keep my status because it allows me to be autonomous. And having been that person, you can cherry pick examples, but the truth of the matter is a simple truth, which is that if 90% of those folks in California disagree with your position, I can assure you that the nation as a whole will see that ABC test is anathema to progress in our nation as it relates to small businesses and, frankly, independent contractors who want to divide their time any way they like. I see my time is already out. Chair Murphy, I'm not sure if that 5-minute clock is really 5 minutes or if it's just 2 minutes, but I wish I had more time. Hopefully I'll have a second round. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're almost done. Okay. I'm just going to go off the cuff here for a second. You're getting ready to tackle, if confirmed, one of the biggest jobs our country is going to face, putting people back to work. While your new boss, the secretary, is going to be running around the country taking pictures and signing autographs, you're going to be in charge of 15,000 people, making sure that people have a job so they can eat and pay their rent for the first time. Organization is a key to success. You think you're ready for it?
I do, Senator. I would not have accepted the nomination if I did not think I was.
It's going to be hard. Each state's different, and you handled California, huge state. Will you be able to handle the smaller states? Because you're going to have to make adjustments because of the size and the people and the ability to have people to work with in some of those smaller states because we're less funded?
So yes, Senator, in my earlier comments, I talked about creating big tables where we invite and give everyone a chance to be heard. I really do believe in that philosophy in any role, as a manager, as a leader, as a government official. And so I do believe that one of my strengths is listening and being willing to and able to bring many people to a conversation. I do think that that those are important traits in terms of understanding what I don't already know, and I know there's a lot in that area.
Would you promise, when confirmed and if confirmed, that you will work with workforce development across this country to get young kids ready to work? And most kids don't need to go to a 4-year school. They need to go and learn how to use their hands. And we desperately need somebody in the Labor Department that will stress workforce development on kids that don't want to go to college but learn a skill. And I think that's going to be very important, in the next 10 years after coming out of this pandemic.
I would absolutely do that, Senator, and look forward to working with you on it. It's certainly been part of my role in California to work directly with the workforce system, including local workforce boards. And I know from your state and others, as I mentioned earlier, there are innovations and effective programs in place that we should look to build on and expand and possibly model, right? States sharing stories would be really valuable. But absolutely, I think that everything that you've said there is important and would be a priority for me.
Thank you very much.
Senator Burr.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll be brief. Secretary, California legislature has just established a new program to provide $600 payments with state money to undocumented adults. My question is very simple. Do you think that money could be better spent on anti-fraud efforts in the unemployment insurance, as you have expressed it needs?
So I would say that the $600 program was meant, again, to meet the tremendous ongoing pandemic-induced needs of California families. I do not believe that the only or maybe even the best solution for the massive fraud issues that we've discussed here at some length is just monetary. I think that what we've seen, and I've said this already, I apologize for repeating myself, is the need to understand the full complexity of why the unemployment insurance system fell short of what we needed, why there was so much fraud, and frankly, a lot of those changes have been made, Ranking Member Burr. I'm not going to say that they're perfect.
I'm going to grant you that there was $20 billion that you consider to be fraud that is non-traditional, but $10 billion was what you called a system that was broken. My question is, and you didn't elect to fix it while you were there. You were in the middle of a pandemic. Now California, the governor just announced he's gotten $10.3 billion more in revenue since he projected in January. This is mid-March. In 60 days, they've found $10.3 billion worth of revenue. And the first thing that they do is to pass legislation to put a $600 check in the hands of undocumented adults. I'm not debating whether that's worthwhile. I'm asking where the priority is in California, where you're still in charge. Would you be fixing the system you just said was broken and that lost $10 billion, not the $20 billion in fraud?
Well, so Senator, again, to be clear, the $10 billion of confirmed fraud was overwhelmingly also in that PUA program, right? The vulnerabilities and the ways that criminals exploited that program is, we have to understand.
Should California fix their UI program?
Absolutely, we should fix our UI.
And should that be a priority from a standpoint of funding?
Absolutely, it is a priority. And again, I'm grateful to the American Rescue Plan for having provided some resources for states. But I guess my point is that I think that the problems also require thoughtful coordination, not just monetary investment. But of course, it's a priority.
We provided that money, $1.9 trillion, based upon what governors told us their revenue shortfalls were. Yet all of a sudden, California's got $10 billion in new revenue that they weren't projecting, 10.3, in 60 days. They're flush with cash, but it doesn't seem like they're directing it to fixing a problem. They're directing it to payouts to individuals. My only point is, if it's a priority, if it's not a priority in California, how can I expect it to be a priority at the Department of Labor? I thank the chair.
Thank you, Senator Burr. Secretary Sue, the long overdue national discussion of systemic racism, as well as the Me Too movement, has increased awareness of the rampant harassment and discrimination that many workers face on the job because of their gender, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, or religion. I introduced the Be Heard in the Workplace Act to address harassment, including sexual assault in the workplace, and I hope working with members of this committee on both sides of the aisle, we can make some progress on that issue. Because building an inclusive economy in the midst of a global pandemic means taking into account the needs of all workers and removing barriers that too many people hold back. As Deputy Secretary of Labor, I expect you would use the authority of the DOL to respond to the impact the pandemic has had on women and workers of color and to deal with the longstanding barriers that create unacceptable inequities in the workplace. Can you give us some examples of how you've approached those issues during your time as Secretary of Labor for California?
So yes, thank you, Senator. I agree wholeheartedly with your premise. We have certainly seen during the pandemic that essential workers went to the workplace, put themselves at risk, and Improbably, in many ways, women were disproportionately affected both in terms of the industries that were most needed on the front lines, care work, healthcare, and also in jobs that were lost, that were devastated by the pandemic. So like hospitality and leisure and retail. And so I think that we need to make sure that the programs that we develop in order to build back better, pay special attention to the many ways that the pandemic has been particularly harmful to communities that were already facing inequities before we came in. One of the areas of work that I have engaged in California is on pay equity. And so before the pandemic, I co-chaired a task force on pay equity in which we were charged with enforcing California's law or implementation of the law. And we spent a couple of years working, again, at a table across sectors with employers and HR professionals, employees and unions, academics, businesses of various sizes to look at the tools that would be needed by both employers, how to conduct a pay audit, how to understand, whether you have pay inequity in the workplace, and for employees, everything from understanding what you make to we realized through research that women actually demand less at the outset of a job when asked how much they needed to be paid. So providing some education and outreach. So I think that, and then the last thing I'll say about that is that I do think that for women, we've seen this in the pandemic, but it was true before too, the challenges extend beyond work to sort of work adjacent issues, right? Childcare, transportation, these things are also very important. I think those require collaboration and coordination with other agencies. And if confirmed, I would, as I did in California, work with my counterparts at other agencies to address them.
Well, thank you very much. That will end our hearing, and I want to thank my fellow committee members for their participation in today's hearing. Secretary Sue, thank you for taking the time to answer our questions and speak about the challenges facing working families across our nation. I look forward to working with you to tackle those challenges as soon as you are confirmed. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions of the nominee, questions for the record will be due by Wednesday, March 17th at 5 p.m. The hearing record will remain open for 10 days for members who wish to submit additional materials for the record. It is my intention to schedule a vote in committee on Secretary's new nomination as quickly as possible so she can begin the important task of helping to lead the Department of Labor.